Hey there, my name is Ed Hudgens, and I want to welcome you to Conversations in Color. We're kicking off our second season. We're really excited, and we're here at Shift Cyclery and Coffee Bar. We're going to be sharing with you this great conversation we just had a little while ago with my dear friends, Dr. Salika Ducksworth-Lawton and Amy Renshaw, part of our Conversations in Color planning team, both of them, and just talking a lot about why we care about this, talking about the importance of interracial friendships and just all kinds of really pertinent things, at least pertinent to us, and we think pertinent to the greater discussion on racial justice and equity. But before we jump into the conversation, I want to take a moment and thank our partners, University of Wisconsin at Eau Claire, the Pablo Center at the Confluence, Converge Radio 101.9, and of course Shift Cyclery and Coffee Bar, who provided the wonderful decaf coffee tonight for our conversation. So without further ado, I'm glad that you're here. Here's Conversations in Color, Season 2. Man, it's good to sit with you guys.
It's in person.
How are you guys doing?
Good to be back. Great. Yeah. How about you?
I'm doing all right. How are you liking the new digs?
It's beautiful.
Cozy and comfy?
I got hot chocolate. I'm good.
I love these benches.
Folks that work at Shift Cyclery and Coffee Bar already know me because I'm here all the stinking time. So this is just like, of course he's here. Even though we're closed, of course he's here. Man, it's so good to sit with you guys, and we're kicking off this second season of the show. And we talked before. We think it'd be a good idea to just talk about why are we into this? Why are we doing this? And Amy, I know you've got really a kind of a fun, unique way that you got into this. How are you? Why do you care about this, and how did you get involved?
Well, I got involved as a groupie, really. I was listening to the show. I think it's so important. You guys are doing such an amazing job, and I guess I don't know. I was just commenting a lot, and somebody invited me to come to a meeting, and here I am.
Yeah, you were on. You were on the show?
I was on the show talking about holidays, I think.
Okay.
Religion. Yeah. So my religion, the Baha'i faith, prioritizes racial amity or racial unity. So I don't know. I mean, that's part of what I guess that inspires me. But I mean, I'm a Baha'i also because I believe in that. So
makes sense.
It's kind of a catch-22. So it's just. I don't know. It's such a huge, complex issue, and it's not going to get better until we go out of our way to make it better.
Yeah. I can relate to the religious aspect of it in that, for me, it's my faith, my understanding of Jesus, and the gospel that drew me into this. I think also as I've developed more relationships with people of color, that's also been a big part of it. Yeah. Salika, I mean, it feels really weird that you'd be a part of this effort to talk about race and racial equity and justice and stuff and all the other things.
It's only my job.
Right.
My job, my faith. And I mean, we're sitting here on Toussaint Lavaux. It's the All Saints Day.
Oh, right.
So it makes sense. And I've lived here in Eau Claire for such a long time that it really is a part of a lot of what I do, as well as teaching it at the university and helping teachers and consulting. So I, didn't think I'd be on radio though. Didn't really see myself doing that. So Ed kind of got me into this. After George Floyd, we thought we need some individual conversations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the heart of what's going to change these situations is going to be people sitting down and talking to each other. It's going to be reaching across race, having friendships. And there's so many interracial marriages, there's so many biracial people now. We have to start working with this. And I think for some people who never thought about it before. That first grandchild, that first son or daughter-in-law, it creates this big difference.
Totally does. I can attest.
And it's not that we need like a new law or anything, but it needs, people's hearts need to change.
Yeah, I was telling Amy before you got here tonight, Salika, that about how you and I originally connected. I had reached out to you because I had an idea about connecting Juneteenth with July 4th. And it was early in 2020 when I reached out to you. And I do it on my show on the radio station, Converge Radio. Every July 4th, I usually do a show that's about, it's kind of focused on lamenting some of the sins of America's past. And I thought it would be really cool to do some kind of program between Juneteenth and July 4th that year. And then, our Memorial Day came and the George Floyd murder happened. And then all of a sudden we're talking about other stuff, and it really hasn't been the same since.
Well,
in a lot of different ways, globally and in our relationship.
I don't think we knew how the world was going to shift. I don't think we knew that, for instance, my field, all of a sudden my field has become controversial.
Oh.
All of a sudden history is controversial.
Yeah.
We didn't know that was going to happen. We didn't know there would be worldwide protest. And Ed and I didn't know that we would wind up brother and sister. But
I mean, why this one, why this murder? There have been murders of Black men, for years and years and years.
I think every generation has its Emmett Till. For my parents, it was Emmett Till. For my generation, it was the LA riots.
Just real quick, not everybody knows the story of Emmett Till. Can you quickly recount it?
Well, Emmett Till was a 14-year-old boy sent from Chicago to Mississippi, as many do. I mean, my cousins were sent to Louisiana in the summer to help pick cotton, to keep them away from the gangs, to keep them out of trouble. Because Mamie Till was from Mississippi. She was a widow. And his cousins had said that they dared him to talk to the white woman who was the storekeeper. And ironically, the storekeeper and his wife were known as racial moderates, which is that's a whole interesting another story. But he had a lisp, and he went in and evidently said, "Bye, babe, bye, lady." She may have taken it as "bye, baby." What she told her husband, we know now because she confessed, was that he grabbed her wrist. And she admitted to Timothy Tyson he had not done that. Because of that, her husband and her brother-in-law pulled him out of his granduncle's house, Mose Wright's house, took him to an abandoned barn, beat him, shot him in the head, and tied him to a cotton gin fan and threw him in the Tallahatchie River. So his body was so disfigured, they had to use a signet ring to identify the body. And the reason why they did that was because this Jim Crow etiquette we had at the time, which said that a Black man would not talk to a Black woman, would not look her in the eye, definitely wouldn't touch her.
Right.
The sheriff was a racial moderate. I keep using this term moderate. We have to
Maybe that's a different conversation.
For 1955. Right. Okay, so that's a whole different animal. But he charged the two men. And it became an international cause, giant amounts of news media. even presented with all the eyewitness testimony. Mose Wright got up there and said those two were the ones, so everything. All white jury took 30 minutes to find not guilty.
Right.
They said if they hadn't stopped 15 minutes for a Coke, it would have been 15 minutes. Both men give confessions to Look magazine, which was the equivalent of Life magazine.
Sure.
It would be, like today, maybe confessing to the New York Times, where they admitted they did it.
Yeah.
And said
that was
exactly why they did it. And it's the spark that started the civil rights movement.
Right.
But before him, there was Eugene Gaines, who was one of the biggest cases that's a forerunner to Brown in 1933. He disappeared. So I can trace this. And I think for this generation, George Floyd was just this image of the corruption we have in the system. And that was a real wake-up call for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I remember just watching the video, obviously, was, just grieves you. And then I had the opportunity this last summer, my wife and I, on our anniversary, went over to Minneapolis for a couple of days, and we went down to where George Floyd was killed. And it was just surreal being there in that space, knowing this man was killed. He was innocent. This was, like totally an abuse of power and all the things that were at play. It was a really kind of solemn, sober moment to be just in that physical space. And one of the reason we started Conversations in Color in the first place is because we know we're not always going to have those huge landmark moments that call us to reflect and to act and to protest and all the things, and look to change policy and whatever else needs to happen. And there's still so much that needs to be talked about.
We,
Sure.
as a country, have lost our sense of there, but for the grace of God go I.
I thought you were going to say we lost our mind.
Well, there's that too. But no, I think we have really lost empathy. But our understanding of reality, I think people have taken this idea that you do everything by yourself to delusional extremes, because that's not the way the world operates.
Right.
And, they want to ignore how all of this happens.
Yeah.
In the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, there was a sense that we have this common humanity, and that it goes across race, it goes across gender. And while we had these segregationists, we had these people, there was also a better sense of the danger they posed. I think because we saw World War II. And we had so many people who had literally witnessed the opening of the camps, who had literally witnessed the devastation. But we're losing that World War II generation. That World War II generation is in its 90s now.
It's amazing how much history is not known and how important it really is to kind of inform our understanding of what's happening right now. Like, we were in that Toward One Wisconsin conference, and Jelani Cobb was talking about how these situations aren't unprecedented, like the Capitol riot. These things have happened in the past.
Right.
And it's amazing to me how little history is required of people. Like, I think you need one semester of American history to get a high school diploma.
Right.
You don't have to have a semester of history to get a college degree at a public university in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was like all the humanities are kind of lumped together. Literature or history or
Hey,
whatever.
it's efficient, right? It's the conveyor belt factory way of thinking about education.
But part of it's the problem is that when, science, it's the meme. Science tells you how to clone the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Humanities tells you why it's a bad idea. It is. It is just a bad idea.
Right.
And it is the humanities that give us the judgment. So what's happening right now is we're having to relearn a lot of history. We're having to relearn the civics that got kicked out with No Child Left Behind.
Right.
And I think that's hard for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But we're also in a world that's so narrow-casted. It used to be 100,000, 100 million people saw the end of the Cosby Show. And then it was like a fraction of that. Maybe 10 million saw the end of Friends. Now it only takes 1 million to make a hit show. Everything is narrow-cast.
Right.
And that gives us these bubbles that don't overlap. And it feels like segregation has become worse. And at a time when we need to be together even more so that we can, when disinformation comes, we can say, well, that's not my experience, I know better.
Right.
We don't have those kinds of experiences anymore. When I was growing up, there was a fence that divided 8th Street from our side, which was the black side, and the white side. But we would hop the fence. Or if you're courageous, you would walk on the metal, there's this big metal pipe over this really deep sort of ravine with gators in the bottom. And you know, kids are stupid, so they just go back and forth over the pipe. But it meant that we knew each other. We lived close to each other. But now we segregate each other not just by race, but by class. And people don't. And
even just ideology, honestly. I mean, I think about like what has been awakened in the last 4 or 5 years. The Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. Countless other things. What we've seen is that it's easy to think we have a black president. We're like, really, President Obama's in office, like all the civil rights stuff is behind us now, all the injustice is behind us now, and then we get, folks that come into the public limelight who have a lot of sway and influence, who are really stoking the fires, and what we're finding is that stuff has always been there, and now they're just empowered to talk about it more openly and act on it more openly, which is all the more reason why it's vital that we have these critical conversations, and they can't be just among people who are like-minded. Like, we need to pull people in who are going to disagree with us and just challenge each other on these different premises that we have that may not be.
And find our, the things we have in common too.
That's right.
We've got common ground. There's common ground between any two people.
Right.
You have something that you believe.
And what's been interesting for me is that both conservatives and liberals, that across Republicans and Democrats, the attempt to censor history has united a lot of people. and I mean, it really is, there's this very small, very vocal group who want to censor and control history. I teach, and other teachers will tell you, whether it's K-12 or university, we cannot brainwash kids. we do not indoctrinate kids.
I saw your Facebook post. If we could indoctrinate kids, we would indoctrinate them to do their homework. No doubt.
Do their homework, turn their stuff in on time.
Right.
Read the syllabus.
Yeah.
Bring me candy all day long. I mean, I don't get any of that.
Right.
Yeah, there's this fear from people who I think realize that if kids are exposed to certain things, they'll start thinking for themselves.
Right.
And they don't want them to think for themselves.
That's dangerous.
Well, it's not that they want us to, they're worried about us indoctrinating them. They're worried about the kids not getting indoctrinated in the first place. And I think that anxiety makes people want to control information. But the more you know, the better you do.
Yeah, and the broader perspective you have. I mean, I know the dynamic you're talking about. I have a friend who years ago, I think I had like a UW Eau Claire sticker on something, and he made comments about the university and painted the picture of the university being this, like, he didn't use the word brainwashing, but we're gonna crank out as many liberals as possible. We're gonna make sure everybody denies Jesus.
Oh gosh.
You know, like it was this real, like it's a secularist propaganda machine. But then here's the thing: is like, I have friends that work at the university, and I have friends that have gone to the university, and I've spent plenty of time on campus, especially when I could go, was it to the cabin over at Davies and have some coffee and one of those incredible molasses cookies. And I never experienced that. And that was even like when I was a tried and true evangelical, that was never my experience at the university.
Well, universities are places of diverse thought.
Right.
I mean, if you go to the business school, they're going to be probably far more financially conservative than people think. You go into engineering and certain other areas.
Makes sense, yeah.
My field, military history, is notoriously conservative, probably the most conservative within history.
Yeah.
And I think that this belief that this stereotype really makes people comfortable acting in ugly ways.
That's true.
So part of the reason why we started doing this was to attack those stereotypes. You know, and to attack those ideas that allowed people to dehumanize other people by putting their neighbors in front of them, by talking to them, and to attack these ideas that allow people to demonize people by class, by race. This idea that, well, if you're getting discriminated against, you probably deserve it.
Yeah.
If you're poor, you deserve it.
Yeah.
It's ironic that
Pull yourself up by your
bootstraps. From the 1930s to today, it's almost this total 180. Because in the 1930s, the majority of the country really understood that the boom-bust cycle meant that they did not always have control over whether they were poor or middle class. And today, you have these people who, until they get laid off, don't understand they don't have control over the economic cycles.
Right.
Yeah, so we have a lot to catch up on.
Yeah.
We really do. But I think that's part of why we wanted today to talk about one of the most powerful engines of breaking racism, breaking prejudice, really is friendship. To be able to have honest conversations.
Yeah.
And it's not the drunken conversations in the bar where stupid things are confessed. That's a different type of building bridges. You know, it's the conversation where people can be honest and talk about the things that are confusing them.
That's one of the things that attracted me to Conversations in Color from the beginning, was that people of different races and backgrounds were having conversations, talking to each other, and you could see the friendships in action, you know, just of the people who were participating in that program.
I think that, and I kind of blame some of the microaggression training for this, there's a fear on the part of whites of inadvertently offending people.
Yeah.
And being anxious about that. And there's a fear on the part of those of us who are marginalized that we'll get retaliated against for being too honest.
Yeah.
But I'm in a stage in my career, if they're going to retaliate, they've already done it.
Right.
You know, or I'll just yell at them anyway.
I'll say though, like honestly, one of my personal objectives with Conversations in Color is I want to be a person that goes first and makes those mistakes. So, and to give permission to other people to make those mistakes. Sometimes I'll say things or ask questions I already know the answer to on this show, because it's important that I can, if I have to look like a fool for a couple of minutes and that gives people permission to make mistakes, then it's worth it, you know, because you're exactly right. I mean, I think and part of the problem is there's so much intolerance, especially the further you get on each side of the conservative and liberal spectrum. There's so much intolerance and there's not a lot of grace.
Well, we need grace. I think we all need grace. I think in the last 3 weeks, I have either had somebody on the crazy left trying to tell me how to be black.
Were they white?
On the crazy right telling me I'm not doing blackness right because it's not a stereotype that they understood.
Are they white too?
Yep. So I figure I must be doing something right. I'm getting shot at by both sides.
Yeah.
But then there's some black person over here going, you're not aggressive enough. You're being too nice to the white people.
You know,
And then there's somebody else going, you are just terrorizing the white people. And I'm like,
Yeah, I always feel terrorized when I'm sitting with you. I mean, I really am super afraid.
yeah, I mean, I don't see anybody running for cover yet. They gave me, at least one student gave me chocolate. Okay, that was a bribe.
That doesn't count.
That doesn't count.
That's
they
part of
somehow
having
stay
a
in there.
genuine friendship, right? Is that you can make mistakes and that person is going to hang around.
Yep.
They're not going to, like you said, demonize the other person.
Right.
Forgiveness.
I think
Grace.
it's at the root of what we're talking about here with the friendship piece. Kind of gets to one of the pillars we always talk about with the show is humanity.
Right.
You know, I think when you recognize your neighbor, and you actually like interact with your neighbor and find out like a little bit about their story, all of a sudden they're a human being and not just the person next door. And it's the same thing with the people we would demonize. Whether like my tendency would be to vilify like the Unite the Right folks from Charlottesville. I mentioned that earlier, or to our previous president, to vilify him. I have to make conscious choices not to. I've never sat down and had a conversation with any of those people.
Right.
But my point, and that's not to excuse anything they've done or said. That's not even the point. The point is, they're still human beings, and there's inherent value in that.
Right.
And so that's where, like, when we're sitting together, being able to honor the fact that we're all people, like in the biblical language that I know, created in God's image, there's inherent value in that.
Created noble. That's
Right.
how they say it in the Baha'i faith.
There you go.
All people are created noble.
I think, one of the hardest things we have to learn as a country and as a set of people is how not to demonize each other. In South Africa, as they were getting rid of apartheid, they had a Truth and Reconciliation Committee to try to get the truth out and to try to support the people who had been hurt and not to punish, but to reconcile them.
Right.
And we talk about racial reconciliation today. We talk about all this reconciliation today. And I think we don't have an etiquette of reconciliation. We don't have the kinds of rituals to show people that you're taking responsibility for your own crazy. I mean, there's a lot of rituals of not doing that. People know very well how to blame the other person.
Right.
But what we don't have are the rituals of saying, I did this, it was wrong, I shouldn't have done this, I have caused you harm.
Yeah.
What can I do to fix this harm?
Yeah.
We don't have these rituals of ownership for our own misbehavior.
Yeah.
And we replace those with stereotypes and assumptions about people that we jump to about people.
We cancel people.
We cancel people, or
That's what makes people so afraid.
Right, it really is.
Anything
I
you
agree
say
with you.
could go viral.
It could.
Well, I think too, because there are people who have wanted me when I'm doing training, well, just tell me what I can't say. And the thing is, you can't do that. I really, some of the microaggression training irritates me. And I say that as somebody at a university who has been in a lot of it.
So microaggression training, you mean like telling people, explaining what microaggressions
Microaggressions
are and how to avoid them?
Because I would rather focus on covert racism. I am not worried about people inadvertently saying the word plantation in front of me.
Right.
What I'm worried about is somebody who is like the Central Park Karen, who has bad intentions and is going to go behind my back and sabotage a promotion,
Yeah.
or go behind my back and lie to the police about me. And I think with all the attention with microaggressions and this sort of, I don't know, petty stuff, we have lost that idea of covert racism.
Right.
Because George Floyd was covert discrimination. She just happened to have a, camera there.
Right.
The Central Park Karen was covert discrimination.
Right.
And to talk about those, but also to talk about the little unconscious things that people who are marginal will use as clues to say, well, this is a sign this person may be a problem. If this person can't look me in the eye, if they're hostile, if they have a cold tone to them, these are clues. But if you're marginalized, you're going to be a little more worried about the bullying.
Right.
But the bullying for me because of race is going to look like the bullying for you because of class. It's going to look like the bullying for you because of gender. They're different motivations, and the tactics may be slightly different, but they look and they do the same.
Right. And they come from the same place.
Yeah, they dehumanize us.
Right. Well, and it's the idea of those in power want to consolidate their power. They want to keep their power. They'll do everything else. They do everything they can to keep their power. And if that means keeping a race of people in a certain spot, or keeping a whole gender group, or people who are non-binary, or whatever the group is, that's unfortunately, this is where a little bit of my pessimism comes in. Like, we're created in God's image and there's so much good stuff in us, but we also have a lot of larceny in us. We also have a lot of I'm up to no good in us. And so I think we're just a mix. And when you have power, a lot of times that works against the nobility in us, I think, especially when it goes unchecked.
I think power and anxiety are the two biggest dangers in the world. Because people in power want to scapegoat other people to keep their power.
Right.
If they can scapegoat this person and get everybody mad at that person, then they can just slide on by.
Right.
And power is just addictive.
Yeah.
It's really addictive.
No, I agree with you.
But anxious people want power because they somehow think that power will make them less anxious.
Yeah.
I meet these people in Eau Claire. You have to understand, I come from southeastern Louisiana. I have lived in Los Angeles, New Orleans, Houston, Washington, D.C., Columbus, Ohio, etc.
At the Ohio State
University. And people here will say, oh my God, Eau Claire is just becoming crime-ridden or something. I'm like, really? Are you here? What
every once in a while I'll hear somebody
about?
talk about the ghetto in Eau Claire. I'm like, there's no ghetto in Eau Claire.
Yeah, my students said, oh yeah, that was from the Eau Claire ghetto. Where?
Right. I
What
mean, we
ghetto?
have areas, neighborhoods where there's obviously not as much money as there are in other neighborhoods, but it's not like, oh my
That
gosh.
stuff is clean.
Right.
As my mother put it, when she was here visiting, one of my students was babysitting for me. They said, oh, well, yeah, we have a ghetto. And my mother's like, where? It's above where the hospital is. And she looked at them and said, no,
Right.
that's clean. I did not see any
That's-
rats over there.
That's
clean.
ghetto interpreted through a sheltered filter.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, that's a hipster ghetto.
Right.
But there are people who have never been out of Eau Claire,
Right.
and they genuinely think that because the culture is changing, because the world is changing a little bit, and our complexion is becoming a little bit more like my hot chocolate, they
And we're not
think,
making tires at Banbury anymore.
and our, you know, and the kids wear a little different clothing.
Yep.
They feel the world is running away from them.
Yep.
And as that world is running away from them, things like little girls having their shoulders out, cold shoulder tops, become scary.
Right.
Leggings become scary. I told my daughter that when I first came here, I was warned not to wear leggings as pants.
Oh, my.
And my boss would snatch baseball caps off of the head of boys in his class.
Sure.
And she asked me, was I a professor in the Dark Ages? And I said, no, it was just the 90s, baby. But the culture has changed. And for the people who snatch the baseball caps, our culture is scary.
Yeah.
So they cling. They cling to these things.
So what do you think, like people who want to make a difference or to, you know, reach out and form in cross-racial friendships, what are the ways to do that?
Well, I mean, the Eau Claire Public Schools are probably the most diverse institution in Eau Claire right now. They're at, I want to say, 17.5% marginalized. So if you want to find cross-racial friendships, you know, volunteer for the school district, work with Boys and Girls Club, work with some of the church groups. The Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts are also fairly well integrated here. But that's going to mean they need to get out. We have an interesting music scene, some parts of it, the rap and the younger part of it have more integration. Some of the newer music that we're seeing has more integration. Mm-hmm. But I think that people need to be willing to talk to other people in their churches and in their workplaces. And they need to, when they feel uncomfortable, they need to be okay with sitting with it.
Yeah, that comfort is a big thing.
Interesting you say that, because I was listening to a podcast this week. It was about racial justice in the Christian church. And the guy was saying, a speaker, and I cannot remember his name, but he's a professor, I think it was at Harvard, in religious studies. And he was saying that for white people to really engage in racial justice, they need to become black. And what he meant by that specifically was divesting yourself of the privilege that comes from being white. And that has been, that resonated with me. And I'll tell you why. And here, so in the spirit of friendship and honesty and communication, you know, we've not been doing Conversations in Color for several months. And I have not been actively engaged in a lot of community stuff outside of Converge Radio over the last few months. And there was a time a few weeks ago where I was thinking about that, and I'm like, boy, that's really, those choices I'm making are really coming from a place of privilege. Mm-hmm. You know, like I don't have to think about that stuff, so I can take a break from it.
Yeah,
and
that's the biggest privilege, I think.
Yeah, and so you know, it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, that's not okay. You know, and it's not only because of the friendships I have as a part of the different justice movements and events and this that happen here in Eau Claire, but, you know, racial justice issues live in my house. My son is black. And so I'm doing him a disservice when I step out of the fray because it's a little uncomfortable. And at the end of the day, that's what it was for me, is that there were parts of it where I'm like, I don't want to have to think about this anymore. I don't want to have to do this anymore. Not that I ever really felt like much of a target in this area, but like, we had, you know, there was one little thing that happened on one of our shows where we were using ableist language. I don't know if you remember that. And it affected me. And it affected me because I'm like, I'm trying to do the right things here. And somebody's hollering at me for this word. I didn't even know like why I'm there's anything wrong with what I'm saying. And it was that feeling, that lack of grace. But it was little things like that that accumulated over months. And I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore for a little while. I just need to.
It's exhausting, and it gets very sad.
It is, but I don't really. Again, it's an expression of privilege that I can do that.
Yeah.
Well, it's, we all have to recharge our tanks, but some of us who are in this community could also learn to be a little less gleeful at catching people in mistakes, a little less nitpicking.
Yes.
A little more call in instead of call out.
Right.
A little less vicious, because you might want, instead of saying you're using ableish language, it would be better for you to use this language.
Right.
There's this thing called wise feedback that they can use in teaching. It's a pedagogical tool. But what we find is if you tell people what they're doing right, and if you make sure they know that you have faith in them,
Right.
expectation theory, they're much more likely to change and to be successsul.
That's like parenting.
It is like parenting. Although once you hit the teenagers, it's harder to do that
Don't ask me.
because things go in one ear and out the other. But to be able to do what's called a soft send-up, if you know the
Yeah.
Gottman work, instead of going, oh my God, you never do what I'm asking you to do, you go, really, you seem to have problems doing this. When I'm talking to one of my children and I'm ready to strangle them, it is not, you've left the dishes in the sink again.
For the sake of anybody who may listen to this later, you're joking about one.
I'm joking about the murder, maybe. But
Wow.
Lori, speed dial. But, it's better for me to say to that child, I really need you to do this. Mm-hmm. When you're ignoring this, you're creating additional work for me, and that exhausts me.
Yeah.
So to try to keep myself calm and not scream them down and not be hypercritical.
Yeah.
But we have a country right now that feels like being hypercritical of everybody, insulting everybody. Yeah. I spent a moment in my upper division class. One of my students asked me, how do you deal with somebody who says this to you? And it's an insult. And my first response, because I'm a smart aleck, is you insult them back. But I had to, and I said that, but that's really mean. It depends. If you want to bring them to your side, you can't do that. Mm-hmm. But it takes a lot of control.
Right.
To not just smack them back down. And that part of the reason why I do this show is because I know I struggle with that. It's easy to demonize people. It's easy to just slap them back. It's easy to go into that sort of intellectual wankery and fighting of one-upmanship and things like that. It's a lot harder to listen to someone who is genuinely trying to change but has done something that frightens you. When your friend who had been in the motorcycle gang was on,
Bob.
That was a little tough. Mm-hmm. I've had more than a few of those since. And in some ways, it is unfair to ask marginalized people to have to do that. Mm-hmm. But the nature of the beast in this country is that marginalized people are going to have a certain amount of grace.
Right.
In order for us to get to where we have to get. But majority people need to recognize we're giving that grace.
That is right on. Because I think the thing is we can't presume upon that grace.
Yes.
The majority cannot presume upon that grace. And then if the grace is given, it's given freely. It's not given because anybody's coerced into feeling like they've got to forgive somebody of something. I think, and that's a hard place to live. especially when you start realizing how much you've screwed somebody over, and then like, I can't make you forgive me. I can't make you express grace toward me. All I can do is say, I'm really sorry, and I wish I'd have done things differently, you know.
And we have to,
I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me, but that's the reality of the situation is, I can't presume that you're going to have grace toward me because of something I've done, you know, in response to something I've done to you. That would be wrong for me to think that way.
We have to figure out too, how do we heal people with that?
Yeah.
Because people don't have to forgive, but people have to work together.
Right.
So we need this set of ground rules almost. And we need this way to come back from all of this craziness. And I think that's the hardest part.
Yeah.
You know, for me, the struggle is when it's somebody who is coming from these stereotypes, is coming from this dehumanization, or who is looking at me and trying to accept me from the stereotype, which means I have to now defend these other people. The temptation is very strong. I grew up down the street from a project, so the temptation is strong to occasionally pull out a cuss word and just boom.
Yeah.
And I have to restrain myself from doing that, because that grace is not going to help. You know, I should say that lack of grace is not going to help.
Yeah.
And, you know, and occasionally there are multicultural people who try to take advantage of the situation. And if I'm there, it's my job to sort of, I need to put a handle on that, because being as ugly as the oppressor is not equality.
Right, yeah.
Equality has to be one standard for everybody for me. It can't be mise en moi, which is basically a specified hatred of Black women. It can't be taking revenge. Because I think for many people who are prejudiced and who have engaged in backstage discrimination, in covert discrimination, what they're worried about is if they lose power, people who are marginalized and their allies will engage in the same covert corruption and do it to them.
Right.
You know, but we've got, if no one will ever find a way back if we don't give them a way back.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
And there are people who are doing this work. So we talk about this reaching out the individual hand. We talk about helping people and shifting their worldviews. And one of the things I have to struggle with is when somebody says to me, well, what about the abortion Holocaust in the Black community? And I'm looking at them going, you realize most poor Black people cannot afford an abortion. Do you realize that? Have you ever seen the actual per capita numbers we are talking about? They are so small that they don't make any sense. It's really easy to opine on theoretical Black babies who might become football players. But embedded in that is an insult.
Right.
That I'm not going to give, it's hard for me to give them the grace of saying they don't know it's there. It's really hard. You know, that comes from overcoming that. I'm a Black Southerners from Louisiana. We had some really crazy stuff going on.
Yeah.
But the people around me have their own crazy. So we're just going to have to try to work it together.
Yeah.
But it is hard.
But
It is hard.
I think you talk about this. I want to come back to something we were talking about a little earlier. You talk about crazy. Okay, so we'll say, I hope I'm not offending anybody by using the word crazy.
Not mental illness. This is not mental illness. This is the privilege and the
Delusional,
delusional things that we do to
Irrational.
protect our power.
But I think about dynamic we were talking about earlier with kind of like the the justice police who are looking for opportunities to correct us on things, and it's one of those things, it reminds me a little bit of my, growing up in the evangelical church and the kind of the way we looked at sin and the idea of sanctification and I am a person of extremes. I automatically go to the extremes on things, and I have to work hard to temper things sometimes. And so my take on, doctrinally, as I was reading the Bible and stuff, is like sinless perfection is where it's at. I got to figure out how to get there. And this feels a little bit like that, where it's like there's not in that time in my life when I thought about things like that, and I tried to live according to that way of thinking, there just wasn't a lot of grace, not for myself or anybody else. And that's where, when I talked about earlier how, there's so much intolerance on both sides of the spectrum, I have, most of my friends probably these days are more on the liberal side of things. And I have a few that are just not very tolerant of anything less than perfection when it comes to your performance of justice speak or justice action. And I just don't see that being helpful.
Well, I would call that performative. It's really, it feels powerful to correct somebody.
Right.
Unless you're the mother of a toddler, then you're tired of it. But it does feel powerful for some people to correct an adult.
Yeah.
But it doesn't help.
It doesn't forge that bond of friendship or open up a dialogue.
How does correcting somebody about pronouns open the doors to hiring more people?
Right.
How does it blow up segregation?
Yeah.
Or
if you feel like you need to correct them, rather than like adding a comment to a public Facebook post, why not have a conversation with them afterwards? Mm-hmm. Even if it's a Facebook message, but it's just one-on-one, hey, just, you might want to consider this.
Well, that's the Gottman-Soft send-up again. Mm. Because when we're attacked, what do? We get defensive. We either are going to withdraw or we're going to just start jumping back on them.
Yeah.
And if you want to be heard, you can't just always be attacking people all the time. But let's be honest, there's a certain amount of people who've grown up in the wild, wild west of the internet who they enjoy insulting each other.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was a teen, it was doing the dozens. Mm-hmm. But you weren't doing it about an issue or anything else. You were just at the bus stop busting on people. Everybody knew it was not to you, at you, about you. It was kind of like the your mama jokes.
Right.
And now it's not at the bus stop and it's not with people who know and there's no context.
Right.
It's all anonymous, yeah.
It's all anonymous and the threats are anonymous.
It's all at a distance.
And we don't have what we used to have for that sort of joking, insulting. So it's not joking anymore. It's just sort of vicious and it's ugly and it's identity, it's identity and it's not the jokes we made about our mothers using their high heels as boomerangs to smack us on the back of their heads and go around corners. And if the black kids did that one, then the Latino kids would talk about taking the slippers and flapping those at the kids. And we could compare the evil that our parents did. You don't have us all at the bus stop anymore.
Right.
And we're not listening to all of the same music anymore.
Right.
So we've got to get back to that and get to the grace and get to know that there are lines you don't cross. You don't say certain things unless you expect to get hit.
Yeah.
I still remember it was like 2007 or 2008, local police came to me and said, could you do us a favor and have an assignment on the N-word? And I said, why? And they said, because some people are going up and going, yo, what's up, mine, in the bars to black men, and the black men are smacking them.
No, really?
Yes, that actually. Dave Sprick, where are you? Because
is that really a problem? That
was
sounds like
a problem.
That sounds like a real, like, legitimate way that should be handled.
It was a problem. And Dave Sprick was the chief of campus police, and he came to me, and I created an assignment using a one-pager from a review of Randall Kennedy's book about it. And we talked about it in class, and I started talking to them about the Black Pass, which is not transferable. And about the fact that not every black person says the N-word. Right. And it's not, you know, someone who wants to call themselves that, that's on them, but that's a class issue. And you shouldn't do it willy-nilly or just assume all black people want it.
My son asks me if he can use the word. I'm like, I don't know. I feel like maybe it's not the best idea, but
nah, don't get in that habit. I mean, in my house, it was forbidden.
Yeah.
And in my neighborhood, it was not a word you used. Yeah. And we would say Negro, please, instead of the other one. If the N-word came out with please at the end of it, you needed to step back and run. You knew that was where that was going. And there's a Hmong pass, and I do not ask my Hmong friends for the Hmong pass. The thing is, if you get that pass, it's generally because you're not going to use it. Mm-hmm. And I have had white, especially male students going, well, I had this one black friend who, yeah, not transferable.
Right. Just don't.
Just don't. And the reason why that friend might have let you do it is he's surrounded by white kids, and he's going, okay, if I don't say yes, I might get lynched. Mm. So and I know it's just thrown around a lot at that high school and middle high school level. My son now confesses that he threw a couple of kids into the Memorial High School pool for throwing that word at him.
Well done.
He graduated. Y'all can't get him. He's been out for a while.
Well done. Well done.
My daughter has lectured more than a few. Don't call her that. But
I can see that.
She's feisty.
Where does she get that? Huh?
She got it honestly. She got the evil on both sides. But, you know, to get people out of the idea that using racial slurs is some sort of, even against white people, I've had white students say, well, why do you call it the R word? Why do you call it the C word? Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to lead by example. I don't want you to say the N word, so I'm not going to call you the C word. There was a joke on my Facebook page that involved a, saltine. And it was my white friends who had put it on there, and they were the ones who were running with it. But one of my friends who had been a first generation white was like, I don't like this word. I don't want us to use it. And I took it down. And said, I'm sorry, I did not mean to make you uncomfortable. My friend didn't. Yeah. He thought it was funny because he saw himself as that. And I had a graduate student who, the R word games, he had found a meme that compared gangsters to that, and he was trying to show the class was the same. And I had to make him take it down because it made people uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Yeah. On the other hand, Tom Hanks on Black Jeopardy, I will show that from now to Kingdom Come.
You know, on that note, you know what? I gotta go. I've enjoyed this time with y'all, but I need to go hang out with my family for a little bit this evening. So it's been wonderful to sit with you.
You know, something you said about Conversations in Color, this kind of new season, is that we were going to talk about different kinds of social justice,
Yes, and I'm
not
very
just
excited about
race,
that.
but
Yeah.
also, LGBTQ issues and ability issues and
Yeah.
anywhere
Any justice
that
and
social
equity.
justice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm excited about that. So, and now I'll blame you for these last few seconds that I didn't get home sooner. No, it's been wonderful. I'm excited to just keep these conversations rolling. We'll have some different folks on the panel at times, and it's just going to be a good time. So, anyway, thanks again. It's
Thanks,
great.
Ed.
Looking forward to next time.
Thanks, Alika.
Yeah, thank y'all.